discover prevalent in the Jewish tradition and also in the Islamic tradition during the time. In the West, Aristotle was not really accepted early on for so many centuries, okay, because the one that prevailed was the theory and the theology of St. Augustine. But what Thomas Aquinas did is he got the elements from Augustine as far as faith is concerned, but he rejected the Platonic dualistic framework of Plato, and then got as his theoretical framework Aristotle. And so he combined two big traditions, Augustinianism and Aristotelianism, to be able to come up with his own theory. Now we refer to this as Thomism. Okay, of course, at the beginning, Thomas Aquinas was rejected and he was declared even as a heretic. Okay, but of course, after he died and he was declared a saint, almost automatically such declaration of being heretic was actually lifted. Okay. So he became very famous, particularly for his celebrated works, okay, which is After Virtue. Okay, he wrote this in the early 1980s. I think he published this in 1983. And then almost every, sound ethicists and moral theologian had to read his work. When I was working on Alasdair MacIntyre for my dissertation, I was able to encounter over 2,000 articles written about him and several books about Alasdair MacIntyre, particularly on virtue ethics, okay, on After Virtue. And then the two other books came. One is Whose Rationality, which tradition and whose rationality, whose justice. And then the other one is the three rival versions of ethical rationality, where he expounds the different ways of understanding Thomism within two other contrary framework. On the one hand, against very universalist discourse, okay, in what he would refer to as encyclopedic framework, and the other one is a genealogical framework, mostly done in a motivist form of thinking. Okay, so what he did, okay, what we see in his biographical account is a demonstration of changes of ethical rationality himself that we see in the very person of Alasdair MacIntyre. And we would see that his own experience became the basis himself of his own exposition of how tradition of ethical rationality happens within particular culture. And that's what we're going to talk about. Tradition of ethical rationality, according to him, okay, is constituted and at the same time constituting. What do you mean by that? When you talk about tradition, especially a living tradition, it is always a product of the whole socialization process coming from a given community. Like, for example, in Papua New Guinea, okay, James was saying that there was a kind of a leadership structure that developed within their particular culture early on. That was necessary to be able for that society to survive, especially given the fact that there are so many tribes and that you have to be able to strengthen your own way of leading your own community, and that therefore you have to be able to make sure that there is so much power given to the leader of the community, included economic, moral, and legal power associated with the leader, precisely because he has to hold this community together. So in a way, the experiences and the reflections of the community was the one that constituted that tradition. This is what functions. This is what is important for us, okay? And these are the customary ways of doing things, because this is apparently have proven to be very good in the way we actually survive within our own particular society. You understand? So tradition is constituted on the one hand. But at the same time, according to Alasdair MacIntyre, tradition is also constituting. What do you mean by that? That the living tradition to which we enter into, okay, becomes the basis for the molding of the consciousness of those who will be part of it. Is it clear? For example, you enter your own congregation. The whole principle, the constitution, the bylaws, the form of life was already constituted, especially from the time of Vincent de Paul until recently. Okay, so it was constituted by many experiences and many reflections that came along with it. But when you enter, you get constituted by it, isn't it? That you get to learn what are the vision, missions, what are the things that I need to be able to imbibe in terms of spirit of the congregation, and I learned the basic ways of living and the forms of life. So in a way, that tradition constitutes you, isn't it? Do you understand? Okay. Al, can you unmute yourself and just respond to to these questions that I would ask? Like, I would like to have somebody immediately ready to respond. Yes, Father, we understand each other. You can represent the class.
Okay.
So is that clear to you?
Father.
Yes.
It's a bit deep. Can you elaborate more?
Okay. No, when you say tradition, it is a living one, isn't it? So it could be a tradition of rationality. It could be a tradition of practices. It could be a tradition of values. It could be a tradition that talk about certain expected behavior from certain people. Okay? So that tradition is constituted. It does not come from the air. It is a product of the socialization process of the community, isn't it? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yes, while it is constituted, it is also constituting. Okay, the moment you enter into that tradition, you're able to constitute and shape your life, your values, and everything about you because of this tradition to which you are actually thrown into. Is that clear? So it is also constituting you. Okay, so there is this circular effects in one's life. We enter into the tradition, we get constituted, and as we participate in tradition, we participate in constituting and reconstituting that tradition. Is that clear? Because when you go to the seminar, for example, you raise critical questions. Well, you are beginning to raise, elements for that tradition to undergo changes and development, and therefore you form part of the element that constitutes that tradition as well. You are not only constituted, but you're also constituting that tradition. You understand? Mm-hmm. Okay, now we move. Because of that, tradition, especially of ethical rationality, according to Alasdair MacIntyre, actually will have several particular qualities. Okay, the first one is sociality. Okay, tradition is always a product of societal processes, socialization process. Okay, it is something that is born out of what functions and what seems to be best for a given community. Okay, for example, killing some people. Okay, in tribal experiences, when somebody, for example, kills or has done something bad to you, and then your tribe will actually retaliate, and then you see it does not work well. So there will be a kind of a system, so a process of socialization that you see there should be another way of doing it, not revenge and not only fighting against family. So we have to be able to reconstitute it in a manner that we will be able to survive together. Clear? Yes. Another element of tradition, it is particular. Okay? Because it is more of a socialization process, it cannot but be always particularly located. Okay? You cannot be talking about tradition that starts from very, very universal and with Archimedean point of view, which means that it is something that is a product of thought, applicable to all, etc. Okay, maybe we will see that assumption is also a product of certain form of ethical rationality that is coming from a particular tradition. Okay, and we will see like Universal Declaration of Human Rights, according to Alistair McIntyre, is also a product of the liberal, particular liberal tradition. Another quality of tradition of ethical rationality is that of historicity. It is something that is embedded in our human history. Okay? You can speak of its own development within a historical period because precisely it is always time bound. Okay? And it is affected, and sometimes it is even conditioned or even determined by historical realities to which a particular tradition had to engage itself with. Okay? And then finally, he was talking about tradition of ethical rationality in the form of narrativity. When you say narrativity, it talks about, you know, a telling, a kind of a narrating of a tradition will always have something, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Just like any other story, isn't it? It has a beginning, it has a middle, okay, where you develop the plot, and then it has end, a conclusion. And any tradition for that matter, okay, that evolves from a particular society through a process of socialization within the context of history actually could be narrated within a particular narrative. So that's the reason why you would say traditions are themselves narrative, okay? They're always, it's like a writing of one's narrative of a particular given culture. Later on, we will discover the one who constitutes the narrative will be the one to make sense or meaning of that tradition. That's very important that narratives are written, okay, either from above or from below. It depends. We will discuss that later on. But for the meantime, it's just to take an account that traditions are also told and retold and actually changed in terms of its narrative. Okay, let's move on. Okay. According to McIntyre, when you speak of tradition, especially in terms of its development, there are three fundamental phases that it undergoes. First, he says there is the period of constitution. Okay? That is when you're able to constitute the tradition, as I said, through certain processes that a particular community has to experience. And then it moves on, okay? When you say constitution, it is a period of unquestioning submission and compliance to the relevant beliefs, texts, and authorities of the community. For example, as I already mentioned, you are somebody who's a lay person who got attracted to the works of the Vincentians. So you go and enter the congregation, and then when you enter, normally you just embrace it and learn a lot of things from the constitution of the congregation. You learn what are expected of me as a seminarian. Okay, I have to be able to follow a full form of life. There are certain things that I should be doing. There are things that I should be upholding as values. There are principles that I need to live my life by. And then, and normally you don't question them. Kapapasok, it's not good at the end, and then you start raising questions. That cannot be. I have another way of thinking. Umalis ka na. You just leave your congregation because you have not even understood it and you're beginning to raise a lot of critical questions against it. That's a problem. Okay? So normally, a person who enters simply just try to learn first the ways of life, the values, the principles of that given tradition, okay, of life, tradition of thought, tradition of the good and the right in a given community. But then later on, you see that certain crises begin to happen in the life of the person, and sometimes it impacts on the greater membership of a particular congregation, a particular community, a particular society. And then you begin to raise critical questions. This is the time when you actually are able to discover the failure and incapacity of a particular tradition of ethical rationality in addressing contemporary concerns, like what James was raising. Okay, now the big man politics cannot be sustained within the context of modernity, within the context of our postmodern life, within the context of all this development, especially when our particular communities or tribes are exposed to a much bigger reality in the period of globalization, for example. And then you'd say, wow, there are so many things that could not be addressed. And there are a lot of anomalies that happen precisely because certain things that have been held as important and agreed upon by the community doesn't seem to work and does not seem to function anymore. Okay? And sometimes it starts with a personal experience of somebody. And then that somebody begins to raise a critical question, and then it impacts on the greater number of population within that particular community or within a particular society. And then this gives rise, okay, that crisis, it gives rise to another phase, which is reconstitution. Okay? Having discovered the, the crisis, during the crisis, the anomalies or the incapacities, the inadequacy of a particular tradition, you begin to think beyond it and then explore new possibilities for a reconstitution of that particular tradition. And here you come up with new reformulation, reevaluation, designed to remedy inadequacies and overcome limitations. Just to be able to give an example, before Vatican II, the church was beginning to experience a lot of problems, crisis, irrelevance. It was beginning to be obsolete, okay, in our world context. And that is the reason why when Pope John the 23rd was elected Pope in his very old age, actually he's called a transitional Pope, he was saying shortly, about a few months after he actually was put in office in his pontificate, he immediately felt the need to call for an ecumenical council. And his thinking was, the church cannot stay in its ivory towers. The church cannot stay to be like a museum piece. That doesn't make sense anymore to the world because it cannot communicate itself to the modern times. So what did he do? He called for an ecumenical council and he called for a review of our form of life, of our liturgy, of our understanding of who we are, of our relationships with different denominations, an ecumenical dialogue, and with other religions. And then he actually reviewed how we should be able to understand our mission in the world. And so we saw that Vatican II, during that period, was a response to a crisis, calling for a new way of understanding ourselves as a church, calling for a new way of understanding our vision, the eschatological vision, calling for a new way of trying to organize ourselves differently, not anymore with a hierarchical order, okay, as institution, as the most prominent thing, but we begin to see ourselves more as a community of disciples of Jesus, okay? Not anymore as somebody who would look at the world very negatively and would just condemn the world, but you begin to see the world as a terrain by which you can actually preach the good news of Jesus, okay? And be able to be an instrument for the transformation of the world itself. So Gaudium et Spes begins to realize that the church cannot remain there in ivory towers, but it has to be grounded in the realities of people so that the hopes and the fears of humanity becomes the hope and fears also of the church, okay, of the followers of Jesus. That is the very, very first statement coming from Gaudium et Spes. So you can see a lot of changes going on because the church underwent some kind of crisis and that it gave way to a new reconstitution, especially through the Vatican Council. Is that clear to you? Okay.
Yes,
Now,
boss.
we will go in particular each of these stages. Okay. First, okay, this kind of thinking that uh, that McIntyre developed, actually he derived this from several theorists, particularly in the development of scientific knowledge, because he says that the greatest evidential way by which we can demonstrate development of knowledge is on the development of science, of scientific knowledge. It's easier demonstrated. And because of that, he actually was able to find Thomas Kuhn, okay, is a science, okay, it's a philosopher of science, okay. I'm sure some of you, if not all, must have studied Thomas Kuhn in your philosophy of science here at St. Vincent, okay. Thomas Kuhn actually wrote the Structures of Scientific Revolutions, okay. He published that in 1962. What is his initial intuition? He says, okay, that normally scientists would agree on what eventually would be called as a normal science. For example, when you want to do research, when you want to do investigations, you start with a hypothesis. And what normally you use are the frameworks coming from normal science. It means a scientific positions taken almost by all scientists, responsible scientists, okay, to be true, to be agreeable, to be sustainable in the way we understand and explain what goes on in our world, in all these different terrains, depending if it's natural science, if it's social science, if it's human sciences, it has a way of trying to explain reality. Okay, it has a framework, and that is referred to as normal science. Okay, of course, just as we explain reality, and then we say, for example, take cholesterol is very bad for health. Okay, a scientific understanding, would prove that that is very problematic. So what happens? Then they would come up with um, a new experimentations, and they would discover, no, not all cholesterol are bad. There are also good cholesterol, and that they therefore would be able to also develop the good cholesterol and somehow eliminate the bad cholesterol. But then another study comes, scientific study experiments would be able to prove that it is not good to have only good cholesterol and do away with every negative cholesterol, precisely because you need to have a kind of a you know uh, combination of those for a human being to function very well. Okay, so there are anomalies, and then that gives way to an emergence of new scientific discoveries. Another bigger example would be, for example, it became a normal science early on that the world, that the earth is the center of the whole universe. Everything revolves around that. And such basic intuition comes from the biblical tradition, which had a very, very important, effect in how people thought in society, especially because the church had power, okay, that was able to impose itself and its terms to society. So if man is the most important creation of God, therefore man who lives on earth becomes the center of the whole universe. And everything will have to revolve around that. Okay, but later on they discovered, no, that is not the case. Copernicus eventually discovered, no, it is not the earth where everything revolves around, but it is actually the earth that revolves around the sun. And then you begin to see some shift. The Copernican shift, for example, happened. Okay, then you begin to realize, no, there have to be some changes to understand it. Okay, so then there were anomalies. They were able to discover new realities that do not fit the established normal scientific framework, and therefore they give way to crisis. And crisis actually gives way to new forms of scientific theories and discoveries. Okay, and then you begin to experiment. For example, the shift from Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics talks about the possibility for any object to move on the basis of some external force pushing it. Yeah? Like the gravitational force or anything. For example, any movement comes from outside that is able to push. But later on, discoveries of new intricate understanding of biology, of physics, we discover that the movement happens not always occasioned by something outside of it, but movement is already built in within the structure of living organisms and even of the physical structure of any reality, because it has elements proton, okay, electron, and neutron, and the tension, okay, that happens within is the one that actually pushes it its own development, its own growth. So there is no need for an external movement, okay, external force to push it, but it's something that is already internally acknowledged. You understand? So that gives rise to a new understanding in science that gives way to a new reformulation in science. Clear? So here, Thomas Kuhn would talk about paradigm shifts. There is a paradigm shift from normal science that passes to an experience of anomalies and emergence of scientific discoveries, okay, giving way to certain crises, and in a way making humanity resolve to come up with new explanation that becomes more sustainable and believable in the way we understand that. So the new normal science is a result of a paradigm shift from an old normal science to a new normal science. Is that clear? So here you can speak of that in terms of, for example, the many developments that we experience now. Okay? So of course, from Newtonian physics, you talk about Einstein's relativity theory, etc., in bigger science, or you can talk about that even in very minutest appreciation of development of technology. That then we were using, for example, DOS program, okay? And we had floppy disk. And then now you realize there are a lot of problems, and so scientists start in developing, and then they move into Windows, okay? And then now, then you would still use, and until now you actually come up with a new program in technology, for example, in computer, okay? And the whole question is, the new model does not commensurate, okay, is incommensurable. It cannot fit the old model. For example, if you buy a new computer, you cannot anymore use floppy disk. It does not fit anymore because you are in a new technological model, okay? So in the same way, society could be understood that way. For example, early on, obedience had to be understood in terms of blind obedience. The superior becomes very, very powerful in a society that was hierarchically established, okay? But now with a new understanding of the church that has to be more community-based, okay, community-oriented, you don't talk of obedience in terms of blind obedience, following just because your superior tells you to do that. But you begin to understand that obedience means co-responsibility, co-discernment, okay? And therefore, it is not just dependent on the superior, but we have to participate in the discernment process. So what actually is happening is a kind of a paradigm shift, okay, to a new model of doing things. Let's move on. How did Alasdair MacIntyre